It is the verdict that's rocked the nursing industry. A former Tennessee nurse has been found guilty of criminally negligent homicide in the death of a patient. Now, 37-year-old Redonda Vaught was found criminally responsible for giving a patient the wrong medicine.
Vaught admitted to making several errors with the medication that day, and her defense attorney argued the nurse was not acting outside of the norm, and they also argued systemic problems at Vanderbilt University Medical Center were at least partly to blame for the errors. Now, some experts say the conviction could lead to other medical professionals to not report any errors that might occur. And that includes our next guest, Bruce Lambert. He's the director of the Center for Communication and Health at Northwestern University. Thank you for joining us this morning. Such an incredible story. I want to ask you right off the bat, did that guilty verdict surprise you?
Initially, yes, because I was looking at it from the point of view of someone who studies medication errors all the time. But when I took the perspective of just an ordinary person sitting on the jury, then I wasn't so surprised. They just saw a nurse who made an error that killed a vulnerable patient, and they wanted to punish that person and hold her responsible. And they thought this would keep their community safe. Now, I think they were mistaken about that, but from their perspective, I think that's the reasoning they used.
Look, Bruce, we all have bad days, but in this case, a bad day turned tragic. And I am hearing from so many nurses around the country who say, you know, on a bad day, I could be the next Redonda. How concerned are you that this might impact the future classes of nurses that want to get into this already challenging industry? We know a lot of people have left because of burnout and COVID. I mean, the widespread implications here, they have to be somewhat troubling to you.
Yeah, I'm extremely concerned about the implications here. I think this verdict puts way too much blame and responsibility on the individual and not enough on the health system that makes people work in unsafe conditions. It sort of blames the little guy. It throws the nurse under the bus. But the hospital had lots of shared responsibility, and they really weren't punished at all. You know, it was an anonymous tip from the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services that led to an investigation of the hospital. And that investigation found that the hospital was responsible. They produced a 105-page long report that found dozens of unsafe policies and procedures at the hospital. The hospital had just installed the new electronic medical record in 2017. There were glitches and delays with that, and they were encouraging nurses to override. This patient, in fact, who died tragically, had gotten 20 medications via override during her hospital stay. There was no barcode scanner in radiology to confirm that this was the right patient. There was no monitoring of the patient's oxygen in radiology after moderate sedation. Paralyzing drugs were available in this medication vending machine, unlocked without sufficient warnings. The hospital didn't report this death as they were required to do to the coroner or the state regulator. The hospital never discussed this error at their monthly patient safety meetings, even after the patient died, until the investigators showed up in November. And these errors involving paralyzing drugs were well known in the industry long before this error happened.
Well, it's interesting to hear you talk about this override. You say that you study medical mistakes, which makes me ask you, how often do things like this happen? What has your research shown you?
Well, I mean, medication errors in general are among the most common kinds of medical mistakes. Estimates are that medication errors happen probably millions of times in the United States per year. And they estimate that there are between 7,000 and 9,000 fatal medication errors per year. And what are we going to do? Arrest all those people, lock them all up? It's incredibly tragic. But most of these errors don't involve any sort of malice, any sort of intentional action. It's just that we have not been able to reduce the risk in medical care the way we have in other high-risk industries like aviation. And you have to realize there's like 4 billion prescriptions dispensed in retail pharmacies every year, probably another billion doses inside hospitals. So even if we get things right 99.9 or 99.99% of the time, it's still going to mean tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of errors. Thankfully, most of these errors have very little harm, but we end up focusing way too much on the errors that cause severe harm or death and ignoring the everyday risky behavior that happens. Hospitals have an obligation to acknowledge the reality of workarounds, shortcuts, that nurses and doctors and pharmacists do every day just to get their jobs done. And they have to design systems that acknowledge the reality of human error and at-risk behavior or workarounds.
We got to end it there, Bruce. All great points, and greatly appreciate your insights. Bruce Lambert is the director of the Center for Communication and Health at Northwestern. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.